Ready when you are.
Ritz, The Blitz, and Glenn Miller's hits. All on tonight's bombshell episode of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast with a little too much vermouth, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. On tonight's programme, we meet John Barrowman's Captain Jack, but it's the Ninth Doctor who shows us his banana. Meanwhile, Richard Wilson is resisting an alien mask mandate. I don't believe it! But with Moffat at the controls, I'm sure we'll get a reasonable explanation. We take a break from resonating concrete to watch The Empty Child and the Doctor dances. I said ready to record, and you reached for the wine glass in order to give us this intro. Hello, John.
Cheers to both our listeners and our viewer.
Absolutely. This is, is this a late night programme? Technically? I don't know. It depends when
There's something
watching.
of an after dark aspect to tonight's recording.
Too hot for TV.
Too broad and too deep.
Well, I guess as well, our listeners will have no idea that John is drinking a glass of wine during this record, but our viewers will be able to see just how many edits we do by how much the wine glass...
It was a specific requirement of mine that I create a continuity nightmare for you this evening.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, to be fair, I think they'll spot the edit points by the jarring jump cuts that I leave in the YouTube version. But anyway, hello, John. Hello, viewers. Hello, listeners.
Hello.
Welcome back to...
Viewer.
I'll explain later.
Listeners.
Conversations about Doctor Who. And we are here to talk about Doctor Who.
Yes.
And in particular, The Empty Child and the Doctor dances.
Yes.
The first, whether or not you count Curse of Fatal Death, that's up for discussion, but the first canonical script by Steven Moffat.
Literally the sentence used in Wikipedia, the phrase used in Wikipedia. The first canonical, yeah.
Oh, God.
It is. You've become that guy. Either you wrote it or you've become that guy. Yeah.
Clearly the latter.
Yes.
Okay, well...
And the former two.
Well, the first canonical script by Steven Moffat. I think we're going to be hearing a little more from this guy in future. I don't know.
He shows real promise.
He shows real promise. But yes.
Let's hope he doesn't get too big for his boots, though.
So, John, give us the numbers. When did this go out?
So this went out, obviously as a two-parter. It went on the 21st of May and the 28th of May, 2005.
Let's be clear. That's nearly 20 years ago.
That's a cool... barring a little change, 20 years ago. Yes.
What is it? This is the equivalent of when we were watching that. The equivalent amount of distance was to Colin Baker's season.
To the hiatus.
To the hiatus.
Yes. Let's watch some... Yeah.
Extremely good point.
But broadly speaking, yeah. I mean, it was really striking to me as I sat down to watch this, to think, my God, this is 20 years ago. And I think I'm going to come back to that point because I think it's quite I think it's typical to sort of, particularly in this hyper media age that we currently live in, to sort of make the point, wow, we're watching this thing from 20 years ago, but it doesn't feel like 20. I don't think 20 years ago ever felt like 20 years ago to anyone who was sort of a certain age. I think this is one of those occasions where I was watching this very first series with Christopher Eccleston. I was going, wow, not only is this quite old, not only am I quite old, but it is looking a little old. And I'm not damning it by saying that, but it's of its time. And I think we'll probably come a little more into why that is and why it feels like that.
And it's interesting, I think, that we get into that point with the modern series now that, obviously, 1963 to 1989, you can track, huge leaps forward. That tells the story of the changing way television was made during that period. Yeah, it is interesting. But before we get into it, what happens in The Empty Child, John?
Well, so the Doctor and Rose, the Doctor obviously Christopher Eccleston, the Ninth Doctor, the Doctor and Rose arrive in London during the Blitz. I guess we're talking September 1940 through to 1941. I think they tell us the year, but it's in that period. It's during the Blitz. And they're tracking some alien shit that's come through time, and they're tracking it, and that's where they land. And obviously it leads to this fabulous scene where the Doctor arrives in a sort of underground nightclub and says, has anyone seen anything falling from the sky? It will make a big bang. And the sort of assembled throng at first look bemused and then laugh, which is a wonderfully sort of...
Oh, they all assume he's doing a comedy bit. I love
yeah,
that
exactly.
scene. Yeah.
It's a brilliant scene. Yeah. But then he... And of course, Eccleston being the fantastic actor that he is, once he realises what's gone on, the face he pulls is...
I made a note of that. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Really good. But yeah, so they that's where they are. Rose, in particular, falls into, or quite literally, the arms of former time agent and current rogue Captain Jack. And also there's a creepy kid walking around going, "Are you my mummy?" wearing a gas mask. And seemingly there are lots of other people who end up with gas masks fixed to them, the same scar on their hand. And it becomes this sort of creepy body horror stuff around why is this replicating. Plus there's, of course, this sort of 21-year-old Nancy who is sort of in charge of a group of kids. I don't think it's a mistake that she's called Nancy, sort of riffing a little bit off Oliver Twist and sort of Fagin's Boys and
That's
Nancy looking at
yeah.
And there's something slightly Dickensian about these kind of ragamuffin kids just sort of wandering around.
Well, especially the scene where they're having dinner with Christopher Eccleston and he's making them laugh. And of course, he is now playing Fagin in the Artful Dodger show on Children's BBC. So it's,
yes, and I think
roundabout.
And I think I'm not sure if it's this year or last year. Also played Scrooge, I believe, at the old Vic. So he knows his. There's something quite Dickensian about this. Yeah, about this story. A lot going on, obviously. It's heavily focused on the Doctor becoming a more romantic figure.
Yeah,
and
you're in that second half of the season where it's about
and opening up to the possibility of romance. I mean, the Doctor dances. I mean, dances is
dancing equals fucking.
Well, it certainly
clear
equals
implication of the script.
It certainly equals romance, and as part of that, there's a joke, particularly obviously in the second episode, where it does equal da fucking. But it's actually broader than that. It's about dancing and it's about romance and joy.
That sort of romantic
connection.
abandon.
Yeah, abandon and connection. I would agree. So there's a lot character-wise there, but also obviously the time. It riffs a lot on what it would have been like, what it would have felt like to be in that situation. I think a lot of wartime drama. We've talked a lot about the boomers who act as if they personally flew Spitfires. A lot of wartime drama tends to the heroic and sort of Whiggish history, sort of like we were always going to win.
Yeah.
This puts you firmly, and it does it through the prism of the horror. Like, what was it like to actually be in a city where the bombs were falling? Well, you've seen that a million times, and you've probably created a synaptic pathway from bombs falling, Nazis, British, standing alone, heroic, brilliant, fantastic. So injecting horror into the Second World War.
And terror as well.
Brings the actual horror of the Second World War to the forefront, and so it's a genius bit of play to actually go, this is actually about the Second World War, even though it's horror in it, but that you need that horror injection of horror to actually bring the ghastliness, the desperation. And there's a wonderful scene between Rose and Nancy where Nancy can't believe that there is a future.
Yeah,
she can't believe it. And that feels quite pertinent today.
Yeah.
at a time when ultra powerful billionaires and ethno-fascists are very much in the ascendant and seem to control all the means of...
Got all the levers.
Yeah. To be reminded of a time when things would have seemed arguably even more desperate. You're sitting in your city and the bombs are falling. Obviously, that's true of any of our listeners. I mean, I'm not presuming there are any, but any of our listeners in Ukraine or we don't know where people are listening. There are or in many parts of Africa or wherever. That's a current concern. But for the sort of largely British, largely Western audience that obviously Doctor Who is primarily kind of
addressing,
to sort of say, well, there was a time when London felt like it could be destroyed.
Yeah.
By the way, this is something that's echoed very much in Steven Moffat's Joy to the World script, which again begins with a blitz scene and people feeling like the world is going to be destroyed, and again leaning on, no, you must cling on to hope. Hope is a radical act.
Yeah.
This is beautiful.
I was going to say, I get the impression you quite enjoyed this.
Yeah, this is outstanding. It's outstanding. And this is before we even get onto the kind of sexual politics, not just of Mr. Lloyd and his fiddling with the butcher and vice versa, and the slightly icky aspect of Nancy kind of blackmailing him over that. But I think, the character of he's put her in that position. She has to defend herself and the children.
Well, let's start with this aspect of it, the Second World War sort of setting. I mean, I'm with you, by the way. I think this is absolutely knockout, and it's all weirdly I hadn't seen this since 2005.
Really?
I'd not watched it at all in the interim. I remember loving it at the time, and I thought, well, almost like this is so good, I'll save it for a special occasion. And then sort of in the
20 short years later.
Well, then in the intervening years, my relationship with sort of the Moffat style. And, he comes out the gate with the box of tricks fully loaded, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
Timey-wimey.
Yeah, being a little bit burnt on that. Sort of, it's not one that I ever actually came back to, even though in my memory it was always really good. So it was almost like watching it. I mean, literally watching it for the first time in 20 years and going like, oh, this is incredible. But yeah, I think it's a good place to start with it, is the politics of how Moffat presents the Second World War.
Yeah.
And as you say, I mean, you absolutely rightly picked up on the fact that by telling a horror story, it really sort of, it's like adding MSG to it, it really intensifies the flavour of the horror of the setting.
And takes it away from pastiche, which is what we're sort of...
And am I right in thinking this is the first time that we've seen Doctor Who do World War II?
You're asking me?
No, sorry. It's literally a thought that just came to me, and I feel like it might be. But I
mean, it comes back obviously with Moffat with the "Let's Kill Hitler."
Yeah.
Although I'm not quite sure whether that's pre-Second World. I think the whole point of that is it's pre-Second World War.
But there's a ton of pointed critique of the national myth of World War II in Moffat's writing. He's being incredibly deliberate here in how he is heroising not just the working class communities, but the looters, the underage unmarried mums. It's like it's actually saying, and that the whole kind of looting during the Second World War is almost sort of like brushed under the carpet, really, of like, oh, this was the thing that happened whilst the majority of right-thinking people undertook their national duty and turned their lights out. And so to actually like heroize these people and having the Doctor make common cause with them, and then all the commentary about emphasizing the horror and the terror of it.
It is kids. I mean, just to be clear, they're sort of...
It is but I think maybe
it's
that's
not heroizing a load of 35-year-olds going from with swag bags going from...
No, I suppose not.
It's a pretty... It's
riffing on that.
It's a Dickensianly melodramatic kind of, I mean,
but I think that's maybe just to help the pill go down. I mean, I think there's absolutely a point that like and as you say with the Mr. Lloyd scene, he's the respectable guy who is, calls the cops on the kids. And yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's maybe I don't think it's, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily describe it as like as a missed beat maybe, but probably what you wouldn't do now is the slight gay shame aspect of like
why not?
The fact this guy's. Well, you wouldn't weaponize it. You wouldn't have a heroic character weaponize it.
I think in that circumstance, I don't dramatically see why not. It would
dramatically
have been,
you would. I'm not sure if Doctor Who would do that now.
No, maybe not. But what I'm saying is that I think it felt to me like a very New Adventures beat.
Yeah.
Like in the sense that obviously it goes, I mean, and indeed laced throughout the episode, both episodes, is the fact that ease with sexuality is something that marks a progressive society.
Oh, hugely.
By the 51st century, you're fucking other species, not even bothering
No,
about gender.
I think the beat that you might not necessarily hit in the same way now is the blackmail aspect of it. But I think the point of it, and the point that Moffat is making throughout, especially in terms of how and where he, deploys character sexuality, is to make the point that
there should be no shame.
Underneath the white, heteronormative, middle class, Britain stood alone read that we have of the Second World War. There was just this undercurrent of stuff.
But also that there should be no
that
shame.
we don't talk about.
The situation resolves itself when Nancy is able to give up her shame.
That's what it's about.
Yes,
100%. Absolutely. Yeah.
And she should, by the way, to be abundantly clear, feel no shame.
No,
she should
100%.
feel no. But once she liberates herself from that shame and accepts Jamie, right?
Yeah.
And accepts Jamie not just to present him as her brother, but to present him as her son.
Everybody lives.
And I just cried.
Yeah.
So
did I.
I absolutely blubbed like a fool.
It's amazing. It's a fully earned, and as you say, in terms of where it goes on the trajectory of the Christopher Eccleston Doctor, of, we meet him as this sort of slightly cantankerous, scarred war hero or war veteran.
Yeah,
he gets past the encounter with the Dalek, and then the second half of his series is sort of him getting his mojo back. And that whole sequence where he's so excited about what a restorative experience it is to have the
well, he's full of bluster and enigma. He's a plotter, he's damaged, he's omniscient, he's frightened, he's lost. He learns to become playful and even something of a lover. Like, he's obviously very jealous of Captain Jack.
Yeah.
And he takes that dance, like right at the end, he takes that dance with Rose and he does not allow Captain Jack to cut in. Because he has also, to a certain extent, abandoned his shame. His shame, his fear, his feelings of guilt have not gone away, but been liberated by the experience of seeing Nancy abandon her shame and move forward as a result.
And he can dance.
Yeah. 2, in the mood, which speaks for itself, really. Yeah,
but I mean, the Doctor's sexuality is something of that's a feature of the Moffat box of tricks that we've never really.
I think he wants to cut in, but with who? It's like, but he's open to maybe having a dance with Captain Jack himself.
There was also the, one of my favourite jokes in it is when the Doctor says, we were just talking about dancing, and Jack says, didn't look like talking, and Rose says, didn't feel like dancing. It's like, it's such a funny, it's packed full of really funny jokes.
Just before that as well, when Rose wants to get him dancing, like, she's bowled over by Captain Jack, but her mavitational attraction is
Very
to
nice.
the Doctor,
Yeah.
like 100%. She has the dance, like she would have a dalliance with Captain Jack, but she wants the romance with the Doctor. It's
Absolutely.
baked in, and it's wonderful when she's desperately trying to get him to dance. She's like, I'm trying to resonate some concrete. That is very British.
It's really it's really funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because it's something that the Doctor, literally in Moffat's next script, obviously is about, his great love with Madame de Pompadour.
I just snogged Madame de Pompadour.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
I mean, literally his next script. And then obviously
I mean, he couldn't. Could the guy miss at this point? Moffat.
you've got the whole River Song storyline
Yeah.
then, which obviously culminates in the Peter Capaldi River Song episode where they're meant to spend like however many years having an extended dirty night together or something.
Yeah.
So it's like the Doctor's,
Which is just a farce. I mean,
Yeah.
the
Husbands of River Song.
yeah, that's just a beautiful farce, as I recall.
But the Doctor's, and actually, if you go back to the Curse of Fatal Death, it's got the, the beginning, the Rowan Atkinson Doctor announces that he's going to settle down and marry the Julia Sawala character.
Yeah.
It's like, this is obviously something that he is interested in. And I think he's aware, like, that line that Rose has, the world doesn't end just because the Doctor dances, feels so pointed towards the fans.
Yeah.
Where it was always like...
No hanky-panky in the TARDIS.
Yeah, no
well, you know
hanky-panky
what,
in the
actually,
TARDIS.
what if maybe to liberate this program and to take it in a different direction, in the same way that they did in 1970 by completely reshaping what Doctor Who could be, and now that's a reference point for a version of Doctor Who that's absolutely classic. What if the Doctor... What if actually Hanky Panky in the TARDIS? What if this new vision of the Doctor as a romantic hero could be the flex that this needs to move in and settle in and be a cultural lodestar in this new era?
And it's really interesting that that's something that, Davis and Moffat and, arguably Philip Segal sort of earlier with,
absolutely.
That sort of quite... I mean,
for the 96 movie, sorry.
The Paul McGann Doctor
Yeah.
is a very romantic vision of the Doctor, and it's really interesting that...
They fit perfectly.
It's all of that kind of stuff.
It's very sensual, yeah.
You sort of feel that... And it never feels done in a way. There was always a certain type of fan that would say, well, the reason why the Doctor is a more interesting hero than Captain Kirk is because he, never cops off with the girl, et cetera, et cetera. And without, although I think they sail close to the wind with the David Tennant Doctor from time to time, but without making him an intergalactic shagger, there is definitely this move when making the series in a modern, by which I mean mid-90s context onwards, that it's like, there needs to be a romantic layer to that. And this really comes out. And I think the script, part of the script, I mean, and as you say, so much going on in this story. But part of it is just about interrogating a more romantic dimension to the character.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, Russell T Davies was very keen to introduce Captain Jack, right? Yes. As I suppose, if you have in 1963 Ian and Barbara, and Ian is the kind of the muscle.
Yeah.
It's interesting to sort of try to recreate that dynamic at the same time as the Doctor himself being a younger, more vigorous. He's sort of there as the muscle. He's sort of there as the more roguish certainly than Ian. But what is Captain Jack being introduced to do you think?
Yeah.
Why did Russell T Davies feel the need to bring this character in? And what do you think is his purpose?
Well, the cynical version is to set up the Torchwood spin-off. But
was that there from day one?
I mean, I'm pretty certain it was announced between Series 1 and Series 2 that they were going to do that, because then the whole of the running, the Bad Wolf equivalent in Series 2 is about seeding the idea of Torchwood.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the non-snarky version is, I think Davis was sort of on record at the time as saying it was about building towards the finale, where there was going to be a big battle and they needed to expand the TARDIS crew, and that they needed someone who was going to be like more of a soldier type character.
They needed backup.
And they probably need someone who's going to fire a gun at a target.
Yeah, and if the Doctor is going to be sort of not holier than thou, because that's certainly not the kind of Eccleston read on the character, but if he is undoubtedly down the line, then having a kind of Han Solo roguish figure who can do the stuff or be prepared to do some of the stuff that the Doctor can't, indeed, right up to and including dying. Even though he's restored, but
it's in the same. Yeah, it's in the same ballpark as the Incheston thing. The sort of interesting thing,
Chitterton. Sorry,
it's sort of the interesting thing about it is that as a character here, he feels very much of a piece with everything else Moffat is doing.
Yeah,
he feels like a very Moffat-y character here. You know, the fast-paced banter. You know, the dirty jokes essentially, which are all sort of Moffat hallmarks.
The very first of which just doesn't work. Like when he says "nice bottom."
I mean, you're a critic. You're a scholar of the filthy jokes. So.
Yeah, I love a filthy joke, and I'm very happy to be corrected by either listener or the viewer. But when he looks at the barrage balloon and sees Rose dangling from it and just sort of lasers in on her ass and says "nice bottom" or whatever, there isn't a double. He just, I mean, he is literally saying "nice ass," right? Like it's not.
It's a single entendre.
There isn't a side to that. It's the only bum joke in the entire.
Ironic.
Sorry, but it is a bum note. That joke doesn't really work.
Yeah.
And I love this, and it's fantastic, and I think a lot of the jokes do work. But that was a really it felt weird to me that passed the edit stage. It just wasn't great. But I think the other thing, just to be...
Yeah, of course.
I think the other thing we were sort of skated around rather oddly is that Russell T Davies wanted an unambiguous LGBT representative
huge
on the
massive.
fucking screen, right?
Yeah.
So I think that... And for that person to be a sort of 1950s comic book quiff in the hair sort of absolutely standard issue hero, but queer, and that representation, I think, in 2005 was a profound part of normalizing LGBT within British popular culture at 100%. The time.
And you have to view it in terms of baby steps, but obviously, that was a huge moment. You know, he kisses the Doctor a few episodes later. You know, in the finale, massive.
With nary a ballyhoo, as I recall.
No, nothing. Also, Barrowman's really good in this.
Oh yeah,
and it's sort of interesting that because I remember him being a sort of turn on Saturday morning TV in the 90s when we were growing up.
Yeah.
Like he was wasn't he like the American correspondent on Live and Kicking or something? And then, you know, he's a Broadway song and dance man. And I think this
I saw him on stage in La Cage aux Folles. He was notwithstanding his behavior, but as a person sitting in row G or whatever, watching, I mean, his performance was spellbinding. He was amazing.
Yeah, no, I suppose we probably should note that there have been, you know, quite a few sort of upsetting reports about his behavior on set. But, you know, as a performer, I think he's great in this.
Yeah.
And it's sort of interesting that outside of Torchwood, you know, he didn't really do much other acting with this sort of second wind that he got in the noughties.
Acting, no, but he had a lot of kind of presenting and guest appearance on stuff.
Very Saturday night ITV kind of.
Very well selling albums. Like he did a series of, like, you know, John Barrowman sings the West End hits kind of thing, and his albums I'm on the spot. But I think if you look it up, they sold distressingly well.
But like I say, this is so densely packed with so much stuff going on, and in fact, there's so much stuff going on, so many ideas, and it moves at such a sort of cracking pace that it's also, I was quite struck by how economical it is in terms of its locations. It uses relatively few quite small locations. I think they reused the hospital set from the hospital location from Aliens of London, you know, a few episodes earlier. You've got that, you've got the bomb site, you've got the interior of a house and some streets, and that's kind of it, really.
But what you got is you got a slightly soapy play for today kind of aspect, right? You've got the creepy, grim setup, high concept mystery. You've got a doctor who is bluster, enigma, plotter. This is very McCoy.
Yeah.
This is super McCoy.
Mm.
This is McCoy with a good budget and a decent actor.
Yeah.
This is 100% what Cartmel, Doctor Who, right down to Rose being a kind of Ace-esque kind of companion.
Mm.
And it's no mistake that the New Adventures got a jumping off point from the McCoy era.
Yeah.
And we end up with this piece of television, which feels like McCoy done right.
Yeah.
There is a very thick line between this and Fenric, right?
Yeah.
Which is also...
Sorry, that's the second mobile. Our viewers / listener will have been screaming at us.
That is the other one. Damn it. Yes.
Yeah.
They would have been... Oh, God, we've lost the audio.
Let's wrap it
They'd
up
have been
now.
absolutely killing us.
No.
We've reviewed Fenric as well.
We have, yeah. Long time ago. One thing I did just want to talk about was the cliffhanger, which is...
But sorry, by the way, coming back to the McCoy thing, Rose grabbing onto a rope that helpfully is dangling down and ending up dangling from a barrage balloon is pretty fucking McCoy.
Quite Dragonfire, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I really...
To be honest, I'd never seen that. I'd never thought of it that way before, but yeah, I'll buy that.
I think this is legit the McCoy era if it was done well.
Yeah.
And I sort of went back in my mind and started sort of like a railway station sort of display board going. I was sort of going, actually, many of those things that they tried to do in the late 80s with the right budget, the right writers, with the same ambition would have looked like this.
Yeah. Totally. No, I agree. Can I talk about the cliffhanger now?
Yeah, sorry.
No, only just to note where, like, you know, we get 3 like proper end of episode cliffhangers in this season. Used to be a feature of, you know, pretty much every episode of Doctor Who. That was one of the shifts moving into the modern era. So at the end of or at the end of The Empty Child, we have, you know, the gas mask zombies closing in on everyone, you know, all hope is lost. The resolution to it at the top of part 2 is brilliant. Yeah. Because it's so like, and there are so many in all eras of Doctor Who, so many cliffhangers that are resolved by like quickly in here or something like that. You know, a quick cop out.
Or the squareness gun, which we see later, like being pointed down, exactly. And they go, So
it's a big quick thinking from the Doctor, but when he does it, it's such a surprising moment, and Eccleston really lands it. And then obviously it works, and then I really love that.
Where he sends them to bed, right?
Yes, he says, go to your room, and then really
I'm very disappointed.
I'm very disappointed. But then that gag when he says, I'm glad that worked, those would have been terrible last words. And then you're into the title sequence. Yeah. Brilliant.
Amazing.
I mean, really.
Just the grammar of television understood perfectly, brilliantly delivered, really affecting.
It's clever, it's funny, it's dramatic.
Really moving as well, because like, you do really understand from the very first moment that you hear, Mommy.
Yeah.
That you're terrified by and want to grab and cuddle that child at the same time.
Well, if we're talking about difference in, you know, what can happen in 20 years, we're both watching this now as parents.
Yeah.
And I have to say that it's like it watched like it I
wanted to grab every single child and just hug them and make sure they were okay.
But the kid Jamie in the gas mask, he looks so small as well. I mean, it's like, is he meant to be 5 or something?
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
But whatever, they picked the smallest kid they could get to do it, and so you're right. It's both terrifying, and part of that terror comes from how heartrending it is.
But just also, are you my mummy? Not so knowing your mummy, trying to find it's fucking elemental.
It's completely desolate.
What it's suggesting. And therefore, when Nancy says, "Yes, I'm," oh my god, I just fucking went. That was it. I'm done.
But even then, I mean, it's like there's no point in this where Moffat rests on his laurels at all, because as soon as he sets something up, he finds interesting ways to develop it. So the most horror films, Doctor Who episodes, what have you, would probably be happy to dine out on just the sort of like the image of the child in the gas mask. But the fact that then he finds other things to do, like when it comes through the radio and you've got, the mechanical monkey toy doing it, and then the words appear on the typewriter as well, all of which is riffing off, well, that's very Shining, isn't it? All of that. But just continually finding new things to do with it.
Richard Wilson as the Doctor, right down to you need to speak to the Doctor.
Yeah.
Like creating this dynamic of, oh my God, is there another Doctor? Is that the thing here? And of course it's not, but it just creates an extra beat of drama that you didn't need, but it just helps you dance to the next act, right?
And then when he succumbs to the gas mask plague, and we've heard that phrase, "Are you my mummy?" Like burned into us so far. So then when he delivers the line, having done this sort of, and it's Richard Wilson's great in this.
You get the slow reveal because the camera pans just back slightly to show the scar, the scar on his hand.
And they don't overuse that because they basically do it in episode 1 with Richard Wilson and episode 2 with the soldier, and that's it. But it's incredibly dramatic and effective.
I do think James Hawes deserves some credit for the direction here.
Yeah. Oh, it's magnificently directed.
Yeah, and
stunningly directed. Given the resources, given it's being shot on low-grade digital videotape, for not a ton of money.
Oh yeah, and it has to be said as well. You can see that the metamorphosis of Richard Wilson's Doctor character into the gas mask zombie is of its time. It's still thrillingly disturbing.
Yeah, it's horrific.
Especially when the eyes convert. It's just really fucking scary.
I mean, it is a really horrifying image. Yeah. And it's like, and I like the fact that even this early on, they're swinging for the fences with that kind of horror. But also, I
like the old girl at the end who said, when I came in, I only had one leg. Well, there is a war on. Are you sure you didn't?
Didn't notice. But that main scene in episode 1 where the Doctor meets the Richard Wilson Doctor, again, it's just a really elegant piece of writing. That it's an info dump.
Don't touch the flesh.
Yeah. At the moment,
which is such a brilliantly kind of almost 17th century plague-esque sort of horror,
But all it is an info dump scene, basically, in terms of its function. That it's like the Doctor goes in, he hasn't got a clue what's going on. By the end of that scene, we know pretty much all the stakes of what's happening.
Yes.
And yet it's so well played, and Richard Wilson's so good in it, and it's got such a grotesque payoff that it's an absolute standout.
And of course we get to the in the end what will become a Moffat staple of
the rogue AI that thinks it's doing the right thing.
Yeah, and ends up fucking everything up. Which again feels of a piece with our modern times.
I was going to say it plays very well in 2025.
Yeah, 20 years later, half a lifetime away for both of us.
But it's the sort of like, I made this picture using ChatGPT and it's accidentally given everyone 7 fingers kind of thing. Is like,
well, it's like, so the neither of the listeners and the viewer, they won't be aware of this, but I asked ChatGPT, can you come up with an I'll explain later blazer badge? Because I don't know, we were joking about Alan Partridge or something, and it came up with something, including a Latin inscription, and then "I'm explain later" underneath, which just seemed to.
So we retitled the show.
Yeah, "I'm explain later." Here we are. Yeah, but this is outstanding from top to bottom. I think the only aside from that first. Arse gag, I feel already at this early stage we're bumping up against the limitations of Murray Gold's music. It's very kind of,
there's less of it than we'd get later. I think at this point he was still using keyboards rather than a full orchestra.
But it doesn't say... I don't feel like there. Don't get me wrong. I think that there's dud Dudley Simpson. But there are Dudley Simpson efforts which are outstanding.
Yeah.
Segun Akinola, I think, is, as we've talked about many times now, one of the real unsung heroes of the new Who era. I don't feel the music adds anything here, really.
No, I suppose not.
So, yeah, sorry, Murray.
Brought us right down there. But no, I think
I'm scratching around for negatives.
I'm congratulations for finding something. And but yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this was, Steven Moffat's first episode, at the time of recording, and when this goes out, we've just seen what he alleges will be his 50th and his final episode in terms of Joy to the World. I mean, 20 years is a hell of a run for someone who I think is, become one of the most dominant voices in well, I was going to say modern Doctor Who, in Doctor Who of any era, really. And I think it's interesting in the way that we've sort of fallen in and out of favour of like seeing, and he doesn't always hit it out the park as well as he does here.
Not least when he's laying a trail, let's say.
No, but in terms of saying like the Moffat box of tricks, the fairly finite number of preoccupations that he has as a writer, it's really interesting to be on that 20-year point in the wave where you can see a new episode that very much like plays to his interests that, in the main, I think we enjoyed over Christmas. And also then just to feel, 20 years on, we're back in a cycle where what he was talking about in 2005, the sort of undercutting the national patriotic myth making, all the stuff about it. Oh, by the way, one other note, actually, sorry, just on our read of the Second World War stuff, the line when the Doctor's talking to the various kids, and one of them just says, and it's a very quick line that goes, "I was just to a farm. There was a man there." And again, it's more stuff that is just jabbing and puncturing at this idea of like, our finest hour. It's really quite Terry Nation like in a way, and it's absolute attempt to like collapse the myth of World War II, just to look at the reality.
Not only is that a very clear reference to child sexual exploitation, there's another kid across the table who says something like, "Yeah, me too," like something. It's grim, and it's. I think it's really exciting to see that the horror of that war, the horror of that period, is reflected most faith. It's funny. I'm a big fan of Hunter S. Thompson, and Hunter S. Thompson, obviously the father of gonzo journalism and the author of a series of articles for Rolling Stone, which got bundled into Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 1972, which is a compendium of his writing about the Nixon-McGovern presidential election in the US in 1972. And I think it was Gary Hart who said that it was the least factual and most accurate story of the election. And in that same way, by being gonzo, by introducing horror elements, by bringing kitchen sink drama that was sort of coded more 20 years later, by referencing many of the preoccupations and like sexuality, the sexuality sensibilities, particularly the progressive ones of that era, and concerns around child sex exploitation, which was still very much brushed under the carpet in 2005. Obviously, with the revelations about the Church of England most recently, it's something that's being more explored now, and indeed exploited by bad actors now as well. But it's by throwing a modern lens onto those horrors and applying various dramatic conceits onto it that we perhaps get a genuine sense that that era was horrific to live in, rather than seeing a simple heroic, well, let's go and bloody give Jerry a go over and all that sort of thing. So I think it's he does that period a service by not making it a pure historical, by layering in horror and sci-fi elements that actually give you a more genuine sense of what it was like to be in that time.
Always keep your gas mask handy in the house. If war should come, Never go out without it. Note down official instructions, otherwise you might forget them. Keep pencil and paper by your wireless set. Do not use the telephone except for very short, urgent messages.
I'm sorry, the number's still engaged.
Not Tweed. No, not Tweed, darling. Think of my line.
I'm so sorry, but the number's still engaged.
You may be causing delay to vital calls.
Oh, just a bit of a drink here. Oh, a little too much of a move. Sorry, Matt.
I mean, also you insisted on 12 takes at that joke, didn't you?
Also, it's a glass of wine. There's not going to be any vermouth.
Absolutely.
It's not a martini. Although, by the way, it's good to know that Moffat likes his martinis as dry as I do.
Another
So he's
thing.
gone up in my estimation.
Put that one in the plus column. It's that time of the show where we.
It's the most wonderful time of the show.
Where we check our inboxes and see if we've had any correspondence.
Have you dusted it off?
Happily, the answer is yes.
Really?
So we had a comment on our episode about Spyfall from
Spyfall!
James, James Welch, who's a friend of mine, friend of the show.
Hi, James.
And he got in touch to say, so Spyfall, the Jodie Whittaker episode.
Spyfall!
Just cast your mind.
Sorry.
James wrote, great conversation, guys. It's funny, I know I'm in the minority, but I've genuinely come to love the Chibnall-Whittaker era. Chibbers
He's
gets
not
a
wrong.
lot of criticism for poor writing, but on a rewatch of his era, I prefer his style to either RTD or Moffat. What that says about my taste, I'm not sure, but that's my personal preference. Maybe I just like heavy exposition. But he's gone on to say, Jodie is my favourite Doctor of the modern era. Overall, I like the dynamic of the fam. I'm not pretending it's perfect, but overall, I like Chibber's era the most out of modern Who. Thank you so much for leaving a comment. And I've been sort of hoping I've been looking for the counterpoint, basically. To the,
Yes.
we've done a couple of Chibnall episodes in this run of I'll Explain Later, and we have, I think, largely eviscerated, would be a fair term to them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what I'm not going to do is sort of say, particularly lean into whether or not I agree with James' point here, because I think, you know,
Because you don't.
because I don't. Well, A, because I don't, and B, because our sort of reviews say that. But what did make me come to mind is that, or what I did think about was
I was more disappointed by the Jodie Whittaker era than I was hating it.
hugely.
Because I really rate Jodie Whittaker. I think she's a fantastic presence. I think a lot of, you know, it's interesting that
It was never a hate watch for me. It was more of a disappointed watch.
yeah. So I'm not
Occasionally,
angry.
I didn't watch it.
I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. It's very much that. I feel that it is perhaps rather. It says a lot about the brilliance of the casting and the quality of the kind of tenor of the camaraderie behind the screen and behind the camera and in front of it that Chris Chibnall created. That at that point where there was lockdown and Jodie Whittaker said, well, you know, they have to hear from the Doctor, and she did that scene famously, and, you know, had the costume, put it on, did that from her cupboard. That she knew exactly who to be, and what 100%. To do. And it was really the stories and some of the writing that I personally feel let it down. But I think that there's a lot to like in what Chris Chibnall was sort of trying to do, and I can see
I totally agree.
why people might have latched onto it, in the sense that I think both Russell T Davies and Steven Moffat, through different lenses, make it, broadly speaking, a psychodrama about the Doctor.
Yeah.
And again, broadly speaking, Chris Chibnall is more interested, not solely, but more interested in the story and the adventure. And
that's it. I think he sees it as an
bolts.
adventure a week kind of deal, sort of procedural.
And actually, where the wheels come off is where he turns it back into psychodrama. About
yeah,
the Doctor.
absolutely. It's interesting that. I mean, yeah, I would also say, and it's interesting that, like, because James says that he prefers the Chibnall stuff to RTD and to Moffat, and I suppose it did also make me think that, like, we're talking about 20 years of modern Doctor Who, and we're reviewing a 20-year-old episode written by Steven Moffat, and as we said, the most recent one was written by Steven Moffat under the
RTD2.
Under RTD2. Doctor Who for 20 years has been dominated by two voices, and I would say not just
yours and mine.
But also two writers of a very strong flavour. I mean, it's like Davis is, you could, as you have said yourself, you can spot the RTD polish in someone else's script. It comes through even in the stories he's not writing on. And Moffat is, as a writer of comedic farce, incredibly distinctive, and the box of tricks, for good or ill. It's like a quite limited set of preoccupations. And I remember Jim, our former colleague on the show, saying, and I can't remember if he said this on mic or off mic, but I remember he was looking forward to the Chibnall era, because I remember him saying, like, I'm just looking forward to some sort of nuts and bolts Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And I can sort of sympathise with that. What it made me wonder is, are we losing something by having Doctor Who made under the modern showrunner model? This is we've touched on this briefly before. The showrunner thing, sort of very much a feature of US TV in the 90s that came over here, 5 to 10 years later, where it's very much like writer producers. And this led to, in the US, what was described as the golden age of TV, because suddenly it was elevating the writer to overall control of the show. So you had like a firm creative hand on all aspects of the show. But for something where, if you consider the wildly different ground that Doctor Who sort of covered in a 20-year span, the classic series, and the number of different modes that we saw the show operating in, to sort of see it, to kind of see it, I don't want to say reduced, because I think they've done some incredible TV, RTD and Moffat, and generally I like both of them as writers. But yeah, just what are we missing by seeing Doctor Who?
I don't accept the premise.
Okay.
I mean, I think that it may have been split between one or two people, but Doctor Who has always been extremely marked by the authorial direction of one or two people during each era.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that I don't want a strong writer's voice. I think it's more that, like, a 20-year
it's not
span
necessarily
where two writers have dominated.
It's not necessarily a writer. I mean, you can look at the Barry Letts wasn't. He did write, but
okay, creative unit. Then.
Yeah, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. Does Doctor Who has modern Doctor Who since 2005 large? I mean, the answer is obviously no, because Doctor Who has never been more popular or more successful than in the period when either RTD or Steven Moffat had been running the program. Now, people will come back and say, well, the RTD2 era didn't set the world alight, but I think a lot of people are.
I think nothing can these days.
But this is my point. Yeah. People are comparing this era of the show with Russell T Davies being able to garner sort of 15 million or whatever 10 million, whatever, people for his first run, and that's just not coming back.
No,
it's
we're in an era where underwatched Star Wars TV series get thrown on the skip at the moment, and that was always the great thing, that Doctor Who could never reach those heights. So it's like, I totally agree that.
But I mean, like, and also I just feel very, very strongly that the arc. I mean, and you are more up to speed with the industry generally than I am, but TV doesn't get made, it doesn't get commissioned, it certainly doesn't get recommissioned without having your big name people or bloody strong authorial intent from the top. You can complain about Russell T Davies being back in charge and his voice being stamped all over it, but you've got Doctor Who. It's there, right? It's there in no small part because he stepped up to do it.
And is bankable.
Yes, and for all that I feel he made missteps with the latest Shutigatwa season, if anyone's listening back many years later, the first Shutigatwa season, I think it's worth having that season for the run of 3 magnificent episodes in the middle of it.
Yep.
Best of which Dot and Bubble.
Yep.
So, and by the way, Russell T Davies in the 60th anniversary gave us one of the very best ever episodes of Doctor Who in While Blue Yonder. So I just reject. No, brilliant. More, please.
Well, there you go. We've nailed our colours to. Well, John has.
Sorry,
I was more.
It's not me speaking. It's the Saint Véran.
Oh, fair enough. Viewers, listeners, tell us if you agree. Tell us if you disagree.
If either of you have been affected by it.
Yeah, any of the issues contained within this programme. You know how to get in touch with us. Send us an email, hello@I'llExplainLater.com. Leave us a comment below the line. Hit us up on Blue Sky. Just search for I'll Explain Later on Blue Sky. Explain Later Pod on Instagram. And however you are encountering this show, through whatever app or medium, there is a little button somewhere to give it a thumbs up, give it a 5-star rating, even maybe leave a few words underneath to tell the world how
Keep
much
it clean.
Like it. I don't know. Get creative. But yeah, all of these things help more people find the show.
Splash in extra vermouth.
It'd be great to get some more people on board in 2025.
Tell your friends.
So tell your friends. And as always, thank you so much for listening and watching.
Yes.
We will be back next week for another conversation about Doctor Who. But in the meantime, have a good week. Take care.
Bye.